그래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, June 10th, here in South Korea, President Jeong Jeom-sig is in Belgium, the first leg of his 10-day four-nation tour of Europe, having landed in Brussels on Tuesday to meet members of the Korean community there ahead of his talks with his European counterparts. Meanwhile, Chinese leader Xi Jinping says he and his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un have reached, quote, an important consensus to protect regional and global peace, as he relays a message of appreciation to Pyongyang following his rare visit there earlier this week. Elsewhere, the U.S. launches a series of self-defense strikes against Iran in retaliation for the downing of an American helicopter, while Israel launches fresh strikes across southern Lebanon in defiance of warnings by Iran against such offensive. President Jeong Jeom-sig is in Belgium on this Wednesday, the first leg of his 10-day four-nation tour of Europe. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min covers his agenda there.
The meeting between President Lee Jae-myung and Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever and King Philip on Wednesday takes place as the two countries celebrate 125 years of diplomatic ties. Expanding cooperation for small and medium-sized firms is high on the agenda, with Belgium being a key logistics hub in Europe and a biotech stronghold.
We will make sure that our companies actively make inroads into Belgium and lay the foundation for them to further expand across Europe.
There is also a focus on culture and education exchanges, such as expanding Korean studies at Leuven University and Ghent University in Belgium. Later in the day, President Lee will also meet with President of the European Council Antonio Costa and President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, building upon their last meeting at the G7 summit in Canada.
We share similar values with the EU, such as a norms-based multilateral global order, democracy, and market economy. It is a crucial partner for us to upgrade ourselves into a diplomatic powerhouse as a member of G7+.
The leaders are expected to discuss increasing trade and economic growth amid growing global protectionism. The 27-member European bloc is South Korea's third-largest trading partner. They will also discuss bolstering security cooperation and joint efforts to tackle transnational crimes such as drugs and terrorism. In 2024, the two sides adopted a security and defense partnership. The leaders are also expected to address regional security on the Korean Peninsula and the Middle East and look to cooperate on energy and supply chains.
It is President Lee's first trip to the bloc since taking office, signaling his administration's fully fledged diplomacy with Europe amid complicated geopolitics. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Brussels.
Staying in Brussels, President Jeong Jeom-sig sat down with members of the Korean community there on Tuesday evening local time and vowed to make a better Korea as the country was recovering from the martial law declaration by the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration in December 2024. He also pledged to make Korea a country that overseas Koreans can be proud of. Beyond borders, the North Korean media, as well as the Chinese leader himself, continue to tout the significance of Monday's summit between the latter and the regime's Kim Jong-un, claiming the start of a new historical journey. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
North Korea and China are continuing to showcase the political significance of President Xi Jinping's first visit to Pyongyang in 7 years, upon his return to Beijing. On Wednesday, North Korean state media devoted extensive coverage to the visit, with the ruling Workers' Party newspaper Rodong Sinmun filling 4 of its 6 pages with stories and photographs from the final day of Xi's trip. Across the top of its front page, the newspaper carried the slogan that the history and tradition of their bilateral friendship are eternally immortal. The message echoed the tone struck by Xi himself. After returning to China on Tuesday, Xi sent a message of thanks to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying that the two sides had reached a series of important understandings and that China and North Korea relations had entered what he called a new historical journey. The visit produced a lengthy joint statement committing both sides to expanding strategic communication, practical cooperation and high-level exchanges. But one notable omission has drawn attention. Despite discussions on regional affairs and security, neither side publicly mentioned denuclearization, Korean Peninsula issues, or North Korea's nuclear program. Instead, the emphasis was on strengthening traditional ties and expanding cooperation across a wide range of sectors. Particular attention has focused on language, calling for increased exchanges between the two militaries. South Korea's Unification Ministry says this appears to be the first time military exchanges have been publicly referenced in a summit-level outcome document between Beijing and Pyongyang.
I imagine military cooperation between China and North Korea will, as with all military cooperation, start incrementally. Something about, for example, cooperation on joint ammunition and logistical support component parts, joint development, for example, as a way for China to pursue some degree of technology transfer to the North Korean side. And North Korean side would see that as a gesture of confidence, also an employment opportunity.
For Seoul, the visit has been closely watched not only for what was said, but also for what was left unsaid, as China and North Korea move to deepen strategic ties without publicly addressing denuclearization. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has launched a series of self-defense strikes against Iran in retaliation for the downing of an American helicopter. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the latest.
The United States has carried out military strikes against Iran following the downing of a U.S. Army helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has since retaliated, launching attacks on American bases across the Middle East, marking a major escalation in hostilities between the two countries. Hours after U.S. Central Command announced the start of its strikes on Tuesday, it confirmed that its forces had struck Iranian air defense systems, ground control stations, and surveillance radar sites near the Strait of Hormuz, describing the operation as a proportional response to unjustified Iranian aggression. In response, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it launched strikes on 21 targets at American bases in the region, most of which were intercepted, according to a U.S. official cited by the New York Times. Iran's foreign minister took to social media to warn that Tehran would leave no attack or threat unanswered, and that U.S. forces should leave the region. The strikes follow the downing of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter near the coast of Oman on Monday, from which the 2 crew members were rescued unharmed. U.S. President Donald Trump accused Iran of bringing down the aircraft and said the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. According to the Associated Press, a U.S. official said investigators believe the helicopter collided with an Iranian drone, although it remains unclear whether the collision was intentional. Iran, for its part, neither confirmed nor denied any involvement, with a semi-official main news agency stopping short of claiming responsibility. The latest developments cast doubt on Trump's claims that an Israel-Iran peace deal was close after he had warned both sides that weekend clashes were jeopardizing negotiations between Washington and Tehran. He had told reporters that a peace deal was in its final stages and that the Strait of Hormuz would reopen immediately after an agreement was reached. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Also, in the Middle East, Israel has launched fresh strikes across southern Lebanon, defying earlier warnings by Iran. Our Jeong files this report.
Israel has carried out a new wave of air and artillery strikes across southern Lebanon, despite warnings from Iran to halt attacks. Lebanon's health ministry said at least 13 people were killed on Tuesday, including 2 in a pre-dawn drone strike near the southern city of Nabateh. The Israeli military also issued fresh evacuation orders for the coastal city of Tyre, instructing residents to move north of the Zerani River. For the first time, the warning included the city's Christian quarter, where Israel claims Hezbollah fighters had recently been operating. The latest strikes come just days after Israel and Iran exchanged attacks following Israeli strikes on Beirut, targeting the Iran-backed Hezbollah group. Although Israel and Iran paused hostilities on Monday, Tehran warned it could resume attacks if Israeli operations in Lebanon continue. Israel, however, has vowed to press ahead with its campaign against Hezbollah, raising concerns about a broader regional escalation and complicating U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to broker a wider deal aimed at ending the conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. Lebanon became directly involved in the war in March when Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel, prompting a large-scale Israeli air campaign and ground operations in southern Lebanon. According to Lebanon's health ministry, more than 3,600 people have been killed since the conflict intensified. Israeli authorities say 30 soldiers and 4 civilians have also died in cross-border fighting. The United Nations estimates that nearly 1 million people in Lebanon remain displaced and about 1.4 million need humanitarian assistance. A U.S.-brokered ceasefire reached in April has failed to stop the violence, with clashes continuing despite the agreement. 이승재, Arirang News.
In other news now, the government here will seek to better support South Korean businesses looking to partake in infrastructure projects in the Middle East. Our Kim Jun-ong has details.
The government has unveiled plans to provide proactive support for Korean businesses seeking to be part of reconstruction projects in the Middle East. Finance Minister Gu Yun-chul discussed the measures during a meeting with economic ministers on external affairs on Wednesday, while reviewing the economic outcomes of recent summit diplomacy. Officials said strong exports and improving domestic demand have kept the economy on a path of recovery, creating room to pursue new growth opportunities abroad.
Our goal is to turn this recovery into lasting momentum by helping Korean companies expand into global markets and secure new sources of growth through stronger economic cooperation.
Countries in the Middle East were identified as key economic partners. Gu noted that the region has been central to Korea's overseas construction industry and remains important for energy and supply chain security. He said infrastructure investment in the region is expected to increase as countries turn to economic modernization and diversification in the aftermath of the war. That could open the door for more Korean companies to expand into Middle Eastern markets.
Infrastructure investment is expected to rise across the Middle East after the war. With the trust built through diplomacy and the strengths of Korean companies, there is significant potential for win-win cooperation.
The government said it will help Korean companies with opportunities in sectors ranging from energy and transportation to urban development and digital infrastructure across the Middle East. Support measures include $6 billion in financing for major infrastructure projects, as well as a new strategic fund dedicated to investment in the region. Officials also pledged stronger diplomatic backing, including high-level government engagement and closer cooperation with regional partners to help Korean firms secure more projects. Wednesday's meeting also assists progress on cooperation projects agreed during recent summits with key partner countries. Officials said they will continue tracking progress in areas such as agriculture, fisheries, and science and technology, while working to resolve challenges that may arise during implementation. Kim Jun-ong, Arirang News.
The first South Korean tanker to clear the Strait of Hormuz since the start of the Middle East conflict arrived at the port of Ulsan on this Wednesday. Owned by Korean shipping company HMM, the Universal Winner reached the southeastern port at around 2:30 p.m. The 300,000-ton vessel is transporting roughly 2 million barrels of crude oil. According to HMM, unloading operations began after the tanker was fully docked at 3:50 p.m. Its arrival here comes about 3 weeks after the vessel transited the strait on May 20th with approval from Iranian authorities. It is so far the only one out of 26 South Korean vessels stranded within the waterway to have made it out. A total of 21 crew members are on board, including 9 South Koreans and 12 foreign nationals. Military orders have gone under the microscope here in South Korea following the short-lived martial law declaration of December 2024 under the former Yoon administration. That being said, the Defense Ministry is now exploring the legal grounds for service members to challenge unlawful orders. Our Cha Yoon-kyung reports.
The Defense Ministry said on Wednesday that it's reviewing ways to allow military personnel to make objections to orders and refuse them in certain cases. Currently, military personnel legally have to obey official orders from superiors. But a possible change comes as part of efforts to prevent certain orders from being carried out that clearly raise questions of illegality, such as a recurrence of the martial law declaration in December 2024. The types of orders that could be refused are also being reviewed, including those that could violate constitutional law. The ministry is planning to set out detailed procedures in a presidential decree. Since the 2024 December 3rd martial law crisis, the ruling Democratic Party and the Defense Ministry have pushed for revisions to establish legal grounds for military members to refuse illegal orders. Following 10 lawmakers from the broader ruling bloc submitting a revision bill to guarantee such a right, the ministry also appealed to the National Assembly's Defense Committee in November last year to revise the specific article, Article 25, so that clearly illegal orders may be refused and that personnel aren't punished for doing so. However, opposition lawmakers argue that the provision could be abused and spoil the military chain of command. The ministry submitted a revised bill to the National Assembly's Defense Committee in February. It is said that the ministerial level of the revised proposal will be prepared in time for next month. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, the main opposition People Power Party has elected Jeong Jeom-sig as its new floor leader. The 3-term lawmaker pledged to rebuild the party, restore unity and regain public trust. He also promised to move beyond factional divisions and lead through collective wisdom. This latest leadership change comes as former floor leader Song Eun-seok stepped down last week following the party's disappointing local election results. Samsung Electronics ranked #1 among global chip makers in facilities and R&D spending last year, with the total amount adding up to nearly 90 trillion won, or some $59 billion. According to corporate tracker CEO Score on this Wednesday, Samsung spent some $34 billion on facility investment and over $24 billion on R&D. Samsung's total spending for 2025 was over $13 billion greater than that of Taiwan's TSMC, which ranked second. Meanwhile, American chipmaker Intel ranked third, while SK Hynix stood at 4th place. A new South Korean drama series called Teach You a Lesson topped Netflix's non-English show last week with 6.4 million views. It also made the top 10 in 48 countries, including the Philippines, Argentina, and Egypt. The series features a fictional office for the protection of teachers' rights that aims to address conflicts involving teachers, students, and parents at schools. Meanwhile, in the southern port city of Busan, the transformation of a former mayoral residence from a solemn place of authority into a public space for people has attracted quite a number of visitors. Our Kim So-young explains.
A quiet path leads up to a wide garden and open buildings. Visitors chat, take in ocean views, and capture the moment on camera. As the sun grows stronger, some pause in the shade, enjoying a quiet cup of tea. Inside, the space offers exhibitions, reading areas, rest zones, and educational programs, all brought together at Domoheon.
I came here because I heard it was a famous filming location, but it also has a beautiful garden, an exhibition hall, and a cafe. It's a great place.
Domoheon officially opened to the public in September 2024, after the former mayoral residence was transformed into a multi-purpose space for citizens. Since then, it has continued to attract both residents and tourists, recently surpassing 500,000 cumulative visitors. At the heart of its popularity is its founding theme, walk, stay, and remember. Built in 1984 and once reserved for top officials, the once restricted compound has now become an open, welcoming place for the public. Kim Seoyoung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In the UK, hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Belfast on Tuesday, setting vehicles on fire following a knife attack the day before. Masked youth set fire to vehicles, including a bus, and broke windows of homes across the city as police deployed armored vehicles. This followed a knife attack on Monday, over which the police have charged a Sudanese man with attempted murder. The victim of the knife attack was seriously injured with slash wounds to his face and back. Members of the public were credited by police with saving his life before officers arrived. The knife attack suspect had been granted leave to remain in the United Kingdom in 2023 after claiming asylum. Northern Ireland's political leaders jointly condemned the horrific attack and the riots and have called for calm. In Kenya, police shot dead a protester on Tuesday as hundreds demonstrated against a U.S.-backed Ebola quarantine facility. Eyewitnesses said the man died from a gunshot wound to the head. 2 people were also killed at the same site last week. A high court judge has twice ordered the government to halt construction at the military base, but U.S. aircraft have continued flying in staff and equipment. The Kenya Human Rights Commission said on Tuesday that hooded police fired live bullets and arrested 19 protesters. The 50-bed facility near Nanyuki is intended for Americans exposed to Ebola who are still asymptomatic. The Democratic Republic of Congo's confirmed Ebola cases rose to 598 on Tuesday, with 115 deaths in one of the largest outbreaks ever recorded. NASA named 4 astronauts on Tuesday for its Artemis 3 mission, a spacecraft docking demonstration next year that will test moon landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin for the first time in space. U.S. astronauts Andre Douglas, Frank Rubio, and Randy Bresnik, along with European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano, will launch late next year aboard NASA's Orion capsule. The mission will not approach the moon, but will test docking with SpaceX's Starship and Blue Origin's Blue Moon landers in low Earth orbit before a future crewed lunar landing. In Japan, a bear has been captured after a multi-day hunt that shut all 94 schools in the Japanese city of Utsunomiya and kept residents indoors for days. The black bear, weighing around 100 kilograms, was first seen on Saturday. It was shot with a tranquilizer gun in a residential area and taken away in a cage on Tuesday. But authorities are keeping schools closed on Wednesday over reports of a possible second bear in the area. Bear attacks have reached record levels in Japan, with 238 casualties, including 13 deaths recorded between April 2025 and April 2026. 주지현, Arirang News.
Rain will persist through this evening. Up to 30 millimeters is expected in inland and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, while parts of the capital area will see around 5 to 20 millimeters. Tomorrow, atmospheric instability will increase, triggering scattered showers across much of the country. Some of these showers could be accompanied by gusty winds and thunderstorms, so please take extra care. As for how much rain, central areas will see around 5 to 30 millimeters, while the southern regions will see around 5 to 20 millimeters of rain. And inland and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province could see up to 40 millimeters. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 16 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 14 degrees, Daegu at 16 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 26 degrees, while Daegu and Gyeongju will both top out at 28 degrees. By the weekend, summer-like heat will make a comeback, with daytime highs approaching 30 degrees nationwide. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at the Tyre in South Korea. Coming up now is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.
The world is no longer connected.
We are moving in different directions.
How far and fast can this actually go?
No more declarations.
We need to turn these promises into reality.
It's breaking apart.
If everything is divided, can we still find peace?
This is how we reinvent cooperation.
얘들아 잠깐만 우리 뭐 좀 까먹은 거 같지 않아?
Curious about Korea?
And especially K-food? How familiar are you with Korean food? The sea on three sides, a mountainous terrain, and 4 distinct seasons. Thanks to these conditions, Korean cuisine bursts with diverse and unique flavors.
Do you prefer sweet or spicy?
A meat lover or a seafood connoisseur?
Can't decide?
There's got to be something here that you like.
For Koreans, rice is foundational. It's a staple and the centerpiece to all meals in Korea. There's bibimbap, rice mixed with vegetables, gukbap, rice in hot soup, and kimbap is the demand around the world.
For me, it's noodles over rice. Korea has amazing noodle dishes. Chuyi ramen and cold naengmyeon to blow away the heat. A meat lover here, pork, beef, chicken, I like them all. Did you know that bulgogi is listed in the English dictionary? There's also the famous chimek, chicken and beer, which is the best combo for a night out with friends.
Surrounded by the sea on 3 sides, Korea has a great selection of seafood, from raw fish to piping hot seafood soups. It's mouth-watering just talking about it. The two pillars of Korean condiments, gochujang and soy sauce.
Ooh, what do you prefer?
Gochujang. I like anything made with gochujang. In general, Koreans love spicy food.
I prefer the soy sauce base. There's something about the salty and sweet that hits the right spot. I think even those who are trying Korean food for the first time will really like it.
But that's not all.
We can't leave out the street food. If you're in Korea, it's a must try. They are both treats for your eyes and mouth.
How about it? Mouth-watering, right?
Korean food, you've got to try it. Discover a whole new world of flavors.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the latest UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
President Jeong Jeom-sig is in Belgium on this Wednesday, the first leg of his 10-day, four-nation tour of Europe. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Wednesday, June 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Today, we touch upon President Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic mission in Europe and its broader economic implications. For more on this, I have Stephen Bork with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
I also have Professor Song Soo-young at Chungang University joining our talk virtually. Professor Song, it's been a while. Great to have you back.
Good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me here.
Right, of course. Stephen, let's start with some information about President Lee Jae-myung's agenda in Europe during his 10-day visit there. He's in Belgium as we speak.
Yeah, it looks like it's set to be a pretty busy trip. He's starting off in Belgium, which is where the headquarters of the European Union is. And while he's there, I believe he's set to meet with both with the Belgian Prime Minister and also with the head of the European Commission. And he'll have a number of things to discuss there. I think exports, defense exports and trade with the European Union will be pretty high on his agenda there. And then I think after that, he will go to Italy, where he will meet with the Italian Prime Minister. And then he will travel to the Vatican, where he will, I think, take part in a mass. And he will, whenever Korean officials engage with the Vatican, it seems like the topic of peace on the Korean peninsula comes up, how to best deal with North Korea, how to move away from confrontation. And then after that, he will travel to the city of Evian, which I think most of us know from seeing on water bottles over the years, to take part in the G7 summit. I mean, South Korea is not a G7 country, so I don't know exactly the technical term for South Korea's participation there, if it's like as an invited guest or as or something to that effect. And while there, I think the member countries are going to be discussing trade and other economic matters, how to cope with various international challenges such as the war in the Middle East. And of course, like every discussion nowadays, they're going to be talking a lot about AI, Artificial intelligence is coming into our lives in any number of ways, and I think they will discuss ways to harness AI and ways to regulate it. And Lee is at a kind of interesting part of his presidency. I covered his first year press conference on Monday, and there was a real tone of optimism there. I mean, the slogan of the press conference was translates roughly as like making South Korea an irreplaceable country. You know, this being a unique place with a lot to offer in terms of technology and popular culture and all the rest. So I think Lee will be, this is an opportunity for Lee to kind of carry out that vision and take some steps towards realizing that premise of South Korea being irreplaceable.
All right, staying with that then, Professor Song, briefly speaking, what are the diplomatic and economic implications of the president's trip to Europe?
Actually, this is the first visit to European continent by President Lee Jae-myung since his assumption of the presidential office in last year, June 4th. So I believe this is a really good chance to develop some the ties, and particularly about the reason why this journey has chosen the first leg of visit is Brussels. I mean, the Belgium is because de facto Brussels is the capital city of the European Union. They have hosted European Council, European Parliamentary, and also European executive offices. Of course, most importantly, NATO headquarters is located here. So this is that's why it starts with Brussels in Belgium. Or in addition to that, in the G7 in Arirang in France, G7 summit meeting will be held, and also there are some invited countries such as Kenya, and Syria and Brazil, India. So in addition to some advanced countries, these countries are also very important partners for the President Lee have a talk with and to expand our economic relationship and diplomatic influence over the world.
Right, of course, sideline summits along with the G7 gathering. Professor Song, some here in the country in the meantime have voiced hopes for this latest presidential trip to Europe to bolster K defense exports. What are your thoughts?
I believe most recently, in the May 31st, there was some ministry-level defense minister talk held in Singapore. There, the defense minister of the United States, Hexas, has criticized again the European Union countries, and also he demands the increase of the government spending for 3.5% of their own GDP. So when in contrast, some East Asian countries have spent enough defense budget. So to that regards, what is clear is the United States clearly urged the European unions to spend money for the defense and the collective security and the collective defense. So to that regards, the European unions would like to build up their defense instruments and the facilities, and also in the case of the withdrawal of the U.S. armed forces from Europe. But it is believed most unlikely to occur soon. But however, still the European Union clearly needs a defense build up. Therefore, South Korea could participate and utilize this opportunity to promote our industrial and economic relationship with European unions.
Right, and with regard to defense, the British daily, the Financial Times even says that South Korea is indeed reaping the benefits of the global rearmament race as well as that of AI. Could you tell us a bit about this coverage and your takeaways?
Yeah, it's an interesting piece, just kind of taking a snapshot of the Korean economy and highlighting that there are several areas of the Korean economy that are doing really well as a consequence of global movement. So the piece really highlights memory chips, which, as we all know, are really booming right now because of all of the construction of data centers and just a lot of the investments in artificial intelligence that's going on. There's also shipbuilding. South Korea and China are really like the major players in shipbuilding right now, and they're enjoying some really brisk business. South Korea's shipbuilding sector has stepped up its cooperation with the U.S., and there's like some promising projects on the horizon there. But the news in the South Korean economy is not all good. I mean, there are, sometimes you hear this talk about like a K-shaped recovery or a K-shaped economy. So there's real boom times in certain sectors, but SMEs are still really struggling. Wages are stagnant in a lot of sectors. Housing prices are still beyond the reach of a lot of families. And so, while we see, kind of headline numbers when it comes to big companies like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, both of whom I believe recently exceeded $1 trillion in market capitalization. And then also the piece goes on to highlight that South Korea is facing this ever-present threat of China, whereas as China develops its technological prowess in a lot of different areas, it is coming to narrow the gap with South Korean companies in almost every sector except semiconductors, and that in the near, it's already happening in some sectors, but the kind of scary scenario is that South Korean sectors are not really able to compete, and they get kind of priced out of business, which has already happened in a lot of, if you follow the industrial history of this country, South Korean manufacturers have already been put out of business because they can no longer compete with China on price, and that's happened already in a lot of places. And so there's a fear that this could have a broader effect than it already has. And so the Financial Times quote, there's a one quote in it that I thought was really interesting, and it described South Korea's industry as living in a semi-permanent sense of paranoia, of this, always feeling like there are threats from abroad, and doomsday could come at any time. And in one sense, that's a kind of negative way to approach your business, but at the same time, it can be positive in the sense that it creates this constant sense of vigilance. It creates this constant awareness that you cannot become complacent in any kind of business. You need to keep moving forward. You need to keep innovating. You need to keep trying to do things better and more efficiently. I've said on these airways a number of times that one thing I admire about this country is that nobody really sits still. Nobody rests on their laurels. People in all areas of life, in governments, in business, in education, and whatever it happens to be, realize that in order to maintain your comforts, in order to maintain your prosperity, it requires constant efforts and constant attention. And so the piece kind of ends on that optimistic note that wherever the economy goes, the people in charge in Korea will keep attempting to move forward and to keep things going in a positive direction.
All right, staying with that optimism, Professor Song, the South Korean stock market has been seeing quite remarkable rallies in recent times. What are your thoughts regarding the rally of the local bourse? Do you believe it's sustainable?
I believe that considering this Samsung Electronics and the SK Hynix, and clearly the demand for the AI and the chips and the DRAMs are in the phase of the super cycle. Therefore, they continue to survive and prosper until, according to the report, that until 2030. The reason is because there is a bottleneck, and each country has needed to build up some AI data center to keep their sovereignty in terms of AI issues. So the DRAM and some HBM high bandwidth memory is still in short supply. Therefore, to that regard, it is good. But as Stephen has well illustrated, there is some shade side. Bright side is good, but the shade, dark side is some stagnant wage growth for some small and medium enterprise. And clearly, the K-type recovery of the economy and development is not good for the whole robustness of the Korean economy. So, but however, still I have been quite optimistic about the sustainability of the Korean capital market because of the government's policy to relieve the burden of the individual investors and the other types of players in the economy could be make some proper expectation about what would be the future, even though some uncertainty from abroad is clearly an obstacle. But however, domestically, the current economic situation is fairly predictable. Therefore, the local Korean capital markets rally, not actually rally, just stay and the stabilization could be sustained.
Right, and staying with the local stock market, Stephen, the Wall Street Journal claims, and I quote, a 5% sell-off on the local bourse is no big deal. Could you give us some context?
Well, on the current Korean bourse, I would say, yeah, it's no big deal. The writer here just makes a point that the Kospi is up 94% this year, which is just a number that nobody saw coming. I mean, again, going back to Lee's press conference on Monday, I mean, he said that he thought getting the Kospi to 5,000 in his first year, I believe it was like a realistic goal. Well, now it's well over 8,000. So the idea is just that what's happening on the Kospi right now is that you have a high concentration in these two big chip makers, SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics, and a flood of individual investors, South Korean and foreigners, people who are kind of new to the Kospi, who see it as a rising wave that they want to get in on. But these kind of unusual circumstances create quite a bit of volatility. And so the writer plots out how there have been a number of times that the Kospi has fallen by 5%, but a larger number of times that it has risen more than 5%. I think he says that there's been nine times this year. And so this is a pattern that shows that every time you have a fall like this, there is a recovery that quite comfortably exceeds that fall. And I would say the other bit of context is just that the way markets work nowadays. I mean, it used to be that a 5% fall in a market, 20 or 30 years ago, that would have been front page news. That would have been, something that people took really seriously. But the way that markets move now, everything is just so much faster and everything is so much more drastic. Everything right now is being fueled by this technology that nobody really knows. How sustainable is this going to be? How much is AI really going to change our daily lives? What kind of return are investors eventually going to see on artificial intelligence? Is this something that, a lot of money is being pumped into this technology and it will struggle to create the kind of returns that make this sustainable? If I had good answers to these questions, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I would be, on a yacht somewhere. I don't actually know how this is going to play out, but this is just a bit of a kind of sober analysis that I think investors would find useful to not read too much into each little move on the Kospi.
Right. Professor Song, I wonder, British Daily, The Times points out that South Korea has created a nation of investors overnight. How do you respond to this observation? I mean, has there been a shift in the investment environment under the Lee Jae-myung administration? And if so, how has it affected the country's economy, do you think?
I think the expression of overnight does not fit with some genuine feature of the resilient and Korean economic situation right now, because clearly the Korean economy and Korean capital market had suffered so much from the Korea discount. Then, since the election of democratic government of the June 4th last year, and also the failed coup attempt by the preceding government, President Yoon, has clearly illustrated and demonstrated that the source of Korea discount is clearly the kind of politically calculated bellicosity under the guise of the red complex that had prevailed, so-called incumbent privileged elites and the Korean economy, elite class people. Therefore, this was removed, and also, as long as we have a democratic and a liberal government has been chosen and selected, and together with some policy that was adopted and implemented by the President Lee, such as some policy to allow these investors to garner the dividend income, and also there is some relief burden has been relieved from participating in the capital market. on the other hand, some biased ground has been corrected to help the individual and anti-investor to participate in. So altogether with these policy adoption and some well-chosen democratic government, and that has helped the Korean capital market has shown such a very high performance. So far, as long as this tendency continues, I believe that Korea capital market maintained some kind of very robust and reliable stance over the next several years.
Right then, Stephen, while the value of the local stock market has been rising in recent months, that of its currency has been falling, especially against the US dollar. What has been the analysis by the foreign media about this grave reality?
Well, all foreign media really can do right now is document this interesting scenario where you have policymakers making a number of efforts to try to stop the won slide, both verbal interventions, and they've announced, the finance ministry earlier this month announced some measures that are meant to curb speculation and meant to restore some kind of stability to the currency. But so far those have failed to, they've tempered the fall of the won somewhat, but they've not managed to engender a real turnaround. And I mean, I can just speculate here. I mean, I guess the big question is, do we see a currency as a reflection of the economic fundamentals of a country? And is the currency status like a reflection of, how investors see the prospect of making money in that country? Well, as we've been discussing so far here today, South Korea is an economically pretty sound and stable place by, most conventional measures. And you have a number of, world-beating industries here and a fair bit of optimism, a fair bit of, industries that are exceeding expectations. But at least so far, that is not being reflected in what's happening with the currency. A bigger question, one that I don't know the answer to, is these chip makers and these booming exporters, how much of their earnings are they repatriating? Are they keeping this in foreign currencies? And is that having the effect of, sapping some of the urgency out of the won? I don't really know. I wonder if, maybe policymakers might sit down with corporate leaders and say, hey guys, we'd really appreciate it if you could bring some of these earnings back home and reinvest some of this here. Another thing is, this is still an export-oriented economy, so having a weak currency is not always the worst thing in the world. I mean, I know that Korean exporters have to import a lot of their energy, they have to import a lot of their raw materials, and having a weak currency presents a challenge there. But so far, especially since the beginning of the war in Iran, South Korea has been able to weather this quite admirably. I think the current scenario is a more optimistic picture than most pundits would have predicted. It'll just be a matter of time if we see that the overall strong measurements, if that can also shed some light on the currency, right, especially ahead of the summer vacation season.
Right,
a lot of people going abroad and want their money to go further.
Right. Professor Song, speaking very briefly, I believe we have about a minute or so. What are some of the variables that you choose to highlight amid the weakening won and the action in the local stock market?
Yeah, for the capital market, the most devastating damage is incurred by the war broke out, such as well illustrated in the US-Iran war and the Russia-Ukraine war. So the war should be avoided in the Korean Peninsula and the East Asian terrain. And another issue is because in September, OpenAI and Anthropic will debut and make an IPO. That could cause some kind of volatility of the dollar outflow from Korean capital markets. So that could affect negatively against the Korean won's value. Of course, this was raised by Stephen also, but this is a little bit risky. But however, I don't think it will. Those monies which are used to prepare for the purchase of some IPO stocks, and they will come back to Korean capital market again. Then the Korean won will be stabilized over time for the next several months.
All right. On that optimistic note, we shall end today's talk. Professor Song, as always, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
And Stephen here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow with updates on the President's diplomatic mission in Europe, as well as soaring exports of K-beauty products to rival the US and France. Do join us then. Thank you for now.
It may have been the tomb of a young prince.